Maria Steen, who was such an important part of the pro-life campaign and effort during the abortion referendum. So, Maria, thanks very much, first of all,
for coming
in.
Not at all, Tim.
Maria, in the programme for government, a lot of people are very concerned now that the new government is really radically planning to clamp down on what are peaceful protests outside abortion clinics. Mm-hmm. What are your own thoughts? Can you explain it, first of all, to us?
This is a kind of almost unprecedented. There is a law that was brought in some councils in England, but throughout the rest of the Western world, this is a very unusual thing to happen. It's basically censorship zones or no-go areas for pro-life people around abortion clinics or hospitals. And the proposal from the new government is that these exclusion zones be introduced around Irish hospitals to prevent people, as you say, holding either prayer vigils or protests or even offering care to women, offering an alternative choice. Despite the fact that they say they're pro-choice, they don't want women to have the choice of saving the lives of their children. So this is the proposal that the government have put forward. It's an extremely worrying proposal for anybody who cares about a democracy, not just because of this pro-life issue, but potentially for any number of range of issues. It's also unclear as to how the government are proposing to legalise this, because on the face of it, unless they specifically name and mark out pro-life people, a ban from protesting or conducting a vigil outside of a hospital might also apply to somebody, for instance, who wanted to protest against a health scandal or the likes of cervical check or other health scandals that might crop up over the years. And so it looks like the government would have to specifically target a group of people with a particular group of religious or moral views regarding the sanctity of life and the idea that every life is precious. If you happen to hold this view, the government thinks that you deserve to have your civil rights trampled upon. And that's a very worrying thing in a democracy.
And so, Garda Commissioner Drew Harris has already said the pro-lifers aren't breaking any laws and they're of no threat to anyone as far as he's concerned.
No.
So is it just that a very ideological government and cohorted politicians are pushing this?
Well, it would seem so, and it would seem sad actually that whatever about Fine Gael, they marked their cards in terms of how they proceeded in the last government introducing abortion into the country. But certainly the new coalition members seem to be also rowing in behind them on this one. And as you say, the Commissioner, Drew Harris, the Garda Commissioner, has said there is absolutely no evidence of intimidation or harassment of women seeking abortion services by pro-life people who are, holding vigils outside these places. And I suppose fundamentally the idea that it is anti-democratic, as Simon Harris called it back in January, I think it was, that it was anti-democratic to hold a vigil or protest outside a hospital is very strange, considering that these are people praying for mothers and their babies going into the hospital, offering an alternative choice to anybody who might change their mind about it. And the idea that this is somehow anti-democratic when what is happening inside the hospital is so morally repugnant to at least a third of our population. And we have to assume that although 2/3 of the people in this country voted to take away the last remaining human right of the child in the womb and indeed to bring in abortion, that some of them at least did so with some kind of regret or not being sure about whether it was the right thing that they were doing.
And would this type of law excluding people from protesting in certain areas be unconstitutional? Or if it was actually constitutional, could it be appealed to Europe?
Well, I mean, that's all, I suppose, to be seen yet. I can't imagine that any lawyer would say this is not problematic. It seems to be seriously problematic given the fundamental rights that are recognised in the Irish Constitution, the right to assemble peaceably, the right to express one's opinion, to have, and your religious, to practice your religious beliefs as well. So, for instance, that would apply to those praying outside of a hospital. Any ban would, on the face of it, be, an offence against those persons' fundamental rights under the Constitution to practice their religion openly.
And do we know if any of these cases have went as far as Europe yet, or maybe Ireland might be the guinea pig?
Not to my knowledge in this country anyway. That's all, I suppose, to be played out yet. But it'll be interesting to see how the government chooses to deal with this.
Yeah, I suppose in the wider picture then, we're living in a country that's radically different from probably the one we all grew up in.
Indeed.
And has changed very dramatically. So a lot of people are asking themselves, how can we pass on our values to the coming generations, our own families, our children, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is an increasingly hostile environment that we're in.
Yes, that's true. But I think I've said before to you and to others, I think there is a certain freedom in realising that actually we're not living in a pro-life country, we're not living in a Christian country anymore, because we know the lie of the land now, and we know what it is that we're dealing with, the culture that we're dealing with. So there's a book written by a man called Rod Dreher called The Benedict Option. And in it he kind of offers strategies for Christians living in a post-Christian world, and particularly in a Western world. And he uses the example of Saint Benedict of Nursia, who was a young man who was living at the end of the fall of the Roman Empire and decided to withdraw from the culture in which he found himself. He was disgusted with the decadent culture he saw around and the loss of what had been a once great civilization. And so he withdrew from Rome and formed monastic communities, which basically provided a kind of continuity for civilization, for faith, and for learning throughout the Dark Ages, as they're sometimes called. And so Rod Dreher kind of uses this as an example to inspire people nowadays. So for those who are feeling, I suppose, disillusioned with the culture around them, the idea that 2 out of every 3 people in this country, or of those who voted at least, voted, as I say, to take away the last remaining human right of the child in the womb. What he would say is, look, nourish yourselves and your children. It's this idea of a retreat, to kind of take stock, to build oneself up, to nourish, not to stay in retreat, but then to go out again into the world, having been nourished and having nourished your own children. And there's also another idea about retreat, which is interesting in a Christian sense. It's struck me before that St. Joseph's retreat into Egypt with the child Jesus, who was in his care, and his mother Mary, was not an act of cowardice, but it was an act of protection when he saw that his child was under threat from the culture around him and the place they were living in and the ruler that was there. He withdrew to a place of safety to protect his family until they were ready to come back to their home. And, sometimes we have to do that. We need to protect the vulnerable in our society. We need to protect our children's minds. We need to be careful about what we expose them to on the phones or on computers and so on, and to make them aware of the culture in which they live. And ultimately, I suppose, the idea of being pro-life hinges on this principle of that every human life matters. Every human life has value, and that's what we need to transmit to our children, so that they in turn, when it comes to be their turn, that they know how to vote, that they are conscious of this as a value that they in turn want to pass on to their children. So it's, it might seem like we've lost a lot of ground, but it's by taking little steps in our own immediate families and our own immediate community, that's how we stoop down and pick up those worn out tools and start to rebuild a culture of life again.
And at the same time, there will still be a lot of people, young and old, who want to get out there into wider society, into the public square.
Absolutely, it's so important. It's really important that we don't cede the public square to those who are anti-life, who want to make abortion freely available. We were told it would be safe, legal and rare, and look where we are now, 6,666 children aborted in this country last year, voted by 66% of the electorate, or those who voted, and there has been no comment on the significance of that number either. If we needed a reminder of the evil that is at the heart of taking the innocent lives of children, and particularly the hurt as well that it causes to women who very often feel they don't have another choice. And now the government is moving in to try to make sure that those women who are on the path towards abortion don't change their minds, that they don't meet anybody outside the hospital that might offer them an alternative.
And so tomorrow, Maria, we're having a youth conference called Unfiltered, and you have a big following among young people in Ireland who are of a pro-life view. Yeah. What would you say to them finally to encourage us all? I'd
say keep up the good work, don't lose heart, and there are many challenges out there, but there are lots of potential hearts and minds to be won, so don't give up.
Maria Steen, thanks very much.